All right, there we go. So before we move forward, any questions before we begin? No? Okay, great. This is the pre-application workshop for CDBG funds for the next fiscal year, 25-26. What you can expect today, and we will, are you all able to see the PowerPoint presentation? It looks a little different on my screen, so thumbs up if you can see the PowerPoint. Oh, great. Woo! All right, we're in business. Okay, so what you can expect today is we're going to go over the funding criteria for CDBG. We're going to go through the application process and then also what you can expect if you get funded with CDBG funds, because that's very important so that way you know what you're getting yourself into. Oh, I see a hand up. Susie, did you have a quick question?
Where am I? No, sorry, I didn't mean to hit that.
Oh, no, no, no problem. No problem. If I believe if you click on the little hand again, it'll take your hand down.
I thought
There
I did.
you go. Great. Okay, moving on. Our CDBG national objectives are as follows. There are three national objectives, and we must your activity must meet one of these national objectives. Your activity must either benefit primarily low to moderate income people, as defined by HUD. It should aid in the prevention or elimination of slums and blight, or meet a need that is of urgency. Now, 99.9% of all activities and projects that we fund and that come to us um, meet the first national objective, which is benefiting low to moderate income people. That's because more than half of the city's population falls under that low to moderate income people category, which makes it fairly easy for anyone to meet that national objective. We also have what we call presumed benefit, and that's what HUD determines are people that, regardless, or groups, people or groups, regardless of income, automatically qualify and meet a national objective as well. And that includes abused children, victims of intimate partner abuse, the elderly, which HUD considers 62 and over, severely disabled adults, homeless people, illiterate adults, people living with AIDS, and migrant farm workers. Next slide, please. So, on top of the national objective, we also have our own city funding priorities, which were recommended by the Block Grants Advisory Committee after meeting with the public about the needs in our community, and then approved by the City Council. And they're on your screen. They're in no particular order, which means that D is not less important than A, B, or C. It's just that we put a letter next to them just so that it's easier for us to reference. All of you here, with the exception of Rec and Parks, is applying for public services today, which means that your priority will be either A or B. So we will only be um, considering public services for those priorities that fall under A or B for public service. And that's prevent homelessness, address critical need, assist at-risk youth, the elderly, and the underserved, and then also expand educational and development opportunities. Next slide, please. So on your screen, you'll see the anticipated CDBG funding. We don't know exactly how much we're going to get next fiscal year. We anticipate receiving roughly about the same as we did for this fiscal year. Plus, we add on some reprogramming funds. That's funding that was left over from the following fiscal year from projects that maybe left money on the table. And then we also have some monies that gets returned to us from other loans that we did way back when. So that gets factored in as well. So as you can see for public service, we're going to have a little over $200,000, which is not that much if you think about it. And I wish that I wish that that money would be more for public services, but we do have a 15% funding cap, and that is a HUD regulation that does not allow us to provide more than 15% of our allocation to public services. So that is why we have that cap. For capital projects, we anticipate a little under $1 million. And we did have one proposal coming from Recreation and Parks Department for the sports complex. And the reason we only received one is because for this upcoming fiscal year, the city council decided to use capital funding only for a city project due to some funding priorities and also the priority of funding the sports complex. Because of other funding that is grant funding that is also tied to the project. Next slide, please. So CDBG Public Services local criteria, as I mentioned, the priorities A and B will be the ones considered for CDBG Public Service funding. Also, just keep in mind that any funding that goes to your activity needs to be used for Santa Maria residents. And that is because the County of Santa Barbara and other surrounding cities receive their own CDBG allocation. And so therefore we can't duplicate efforts. And therefore we have to show that we're using our funding for our residents, just like, for example, the city of Lompoc, city of Goleta, County of Santa Barbara uses it for their residents. Agencies must not provide a duplicate service, so exactly the same service as another agency. And again, that's because we have limited funding, so we're trying to meet fund as many different needs as possible. Agencies must demonstrate that funding is sought from a variety of ways, and that means that we should not be the be all end all for any agency applying for funding. You should have different funding sources, and our CDBG dollars should augment your services, not sustain your services. Agencies should have adequate administrative capacity to manage CDBG funds, and that's because CDBG does have strings attached, which means it does have some administrative impacts. It does require paperwork. Uh, we just want to make sure that the agency is aware that there will be some time spent on your end to be able to provide us the information we need to provide you the funding. Priority will be given to agencies that have been in existence and effectively provided service for at least 3 years. And that's because, again, CDBG funding does have some strings attached to it. It does have some administrative burden to it. And therefore, we want to make sure, one, that the agency is prepared to handle this type of grant funding. And then also that whatever the CDBG funding is used for is an activity that has already been established and is growing in our community. The agency should provide services that reduce city or other government costs, and that is something that we appreciate every single agency that's joining us today. You all do so many great things for our community, and we really greatly appreciate it. And that is why the city provides the funding to the nonprofits, because no one can do it better than all of you. And also, the agency should provide an efficient level of service at the least cost possible. And of course, you all do. We see it day in and day out. All of we see your budgets. We know what you're able to do with the limited funding you have. So that's, that goes without saying. All of you do a wonderful job. Next slide.
Before moving on to capital, I was just gonna remind everyone to fill out the attendance sheet. We have 35 people in attendance, and I think we only have 29 responses. So just a reminder, attendance is mandatory, so just make sure to document that. But there's capital.
Thank you, Alicia.
Mhm.
So for capital, I'm not going to spend too much time, being that we do have Recreation and Parks who applied for funding for the same project last year. And again, the sports complex is something that we are very excited about, looking forward to. This is something that has been in the works for many, many years, and I can't wait to see it built and ready for public use in a few years. But for capital projects, in case next year you choose to apply, there is a project proposal process. So we ask that proposals be submitted, and that has already happened. And then council vets them and ranks them, and then provides recommendations as to how to proceed. That way, the applicant isn't spending too much time on an application that ultimately may not get funded. Next slide, please. So a few things that we look at for capital projects, and again, this is more informative in case next year you choose to apply for capital funding. We look at project readiness. Is the project ready to go? Financial feasibility. Is the project's budget realistic? And is our funding going to be able to assist in furthering that project, or is there still funding that needs to be sought? The cost efficiency, are we getting the most bang for our buck? And then the administrative capacity, which again, with capital projects, there is quite a bit of administrative um, impacts because of the additional regulations that HUD has imposed in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. And those additional regulations are on your screen. Davis-Bacon has always been in effect the prevailing wage aspect, which is always triggered with any capital project. And then the Section 3 and the Build America, Buy America, those are fairly new. Section 3 was revised a few years ago, and basically any capital project under over $200,000 triggers the Section 3 requirement, and then any project over 250,000 triggers the Build America, Buy America Act, which that one was implemented last year and is in effect. And that basically states that anything connected with infrastructure projects like construction, uh, rehabilitation, maintenance, repairs, funded with CDBG funds the material must be produced in the United States. And that includes iron and steel, manufactured products, and construction material. And I think this is, I have one more slide before I hand it over to Alicia. So the application process in a nutshell. The application must be submitted through Zoom Grants. And again, this is for all project, capital, and public services. Application must be submitted through Zoom Grants by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, November 24th. We wanted to move up the deadline slightly by like a week, so that way you were able to just not have to worry about it during your Thanksgiving holiday. Um, we we ask that if you're a public service applying for two different programs, you will submit an application for each program. Read through all application instructions through Zoom Grants thoroughly. And if you apply before the deadline, you can still make changes to the application up to the last day. We highly recommend that you submit your application as soon as possible. Like I said, you can always go back in and make changes, but it's better to have it in there than not have it in there and then miss the deadline. Also, keep in mind, we did go through the application. We did change some things. It's not drastic. We basically just got rid of a few questions, which then reorganized the questions a bit. but we wanted to simplify the application. We went through and saw that maybe some questions were a bit redundant. So we removed those questions. And then Alicia and Daisy will go into it further, but we are also changing our process a little bit leading up to the application deadline. So that way we are more available to you for questions, comments, concerns. So that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Alicia, unless you have any questions before we move on. Right, thank you.
Okay, so your CDBG application will be separated into separate tabs. So there'll be the pre-application tab, which is just, I think you can bypass it now that the deadline has passed for capital. There'll also be the application questions tab, the budget tab, beneficiary information, and the requested documents that are required to be submitted with your application. So your application questions tab, that'll just ask general information that pertains to your proposed program. And that's specific to just the Santa Maria only and Santa Maria clients that you'll be serving. It'll define the target population and how you'll be serving that target population. You'll describe your goals and outcome measures. You'll identify any partnerships that you have or use of volunteers. And then general agency information, which is questions 17 through 20, that just pertains to background information on the applicant and the agency. So if you're submitting multiple applications, same agency, just different program, this part would be the same for each application that you're submitting. And let me see, did someone have a comment? It's hard for me to see. Oh, Rosie, sorry. So the beneficiary information tab under example is how it will appear in Zoom grants. And 1 through 5 just identifies an instruction on how you fill out each section. So for item 1, it's CDBG amount requested, how much you're requesting on this application. Item 2 is your overall fiscal year 25-26 budget for the Santa Maria program only. So this must match the total listed under your budget tab for overall budget for Santa Maria program, which will be under revenue in the program budget tab. And this budget will reflect only the amount budgeted to serve clients in Santa Maria, so do not include the agency's overall or countywide budget for this program. Item 3 will automatically be calculated based on items 1 and 2. So based on the amount requested and the overall program budget. So it's 20,000 divided by 500,000, and then it'll automatically calculate a percentage. And then item 4, you'll put the overall numbers, overall number of persons served with all Santa Maria program funding. So for example, this would interpret as there are 300 individuals being served with approximately 500,000. And then item 5, that'll be automatically calculated by Zoom grants. And then here it's just the breakdown of how that's calculated. So percent of CDBG investment multiplied by the overall number of unduplicated Santa Maria persons that will be served with all Santa Maria program funding sources. So when you're filling these out, just make sure to reflect the instructions, and the instructions will also be included in Zoom grants, and this PowerPoint presentation will be provided following the meeting. Before I move on to the second section of this tab, does anyone have any questions on how to report at the moment? Or Rosie, is there anything you'd like to add to explain it a bit further as well?
I think you did a great job.
I don't think we have any questions. So I'll move on to units of service. So this section in the gray is what it looks like for units of service. If you've applied for our funding in the past, it used to be just a general application question, but we tried to simplify it. So in this section, you'll explain the program's unit of service. So for example, we just used meals. It could be bed nights. It could be counseling hours. It just depends on what type of service your agency provides. And then the second part of the section, you're just going to fill in the blank. So one person equals approximately how many units of service. So the way this translates is one person served equals approximately 100 meals. So this is all you'll fill in. These instructions below is just kind of how we'll interpret it, just to make sure that you're filling in the right number. So then we'll use the formula total from item 5 in the previous table. So as you can see, that came out to 12 persons served. So it's 12 persons served multiplied by 100 meals per person. That translates that approximately 1,200 meals will be served with CDBG funding to those 12 individuals. So it seems a little bit confusing, but it's just the formula that we came up with to be able to explain and be fair with across the board for all agencies. But we try to simplify this section a little bit more, just because it's been a common issue in the previous years. Does anyone have any questions? So for this section, all you're going to fill in is what the program's unit of service is, and then the approximate units of service per person. The CDBG budget tab, this is for the proposed program / project only. Column A of the program budget is total fiscal year 24-25 budget for the proposed program. Column B is the total fiscal year 25-26 budget for the proposed program. And column C would only be for the expenses section. This is the CDBG amount requested of the budget for the program. As I mentioned, the amount should include the funding received only for Santa Maria services and not the countywide or entire agency budget. For capital projects, it's important to make sure that labor standards are included, as Davis-Bacon prevailing wages may apply. So if it applies to the project, the budget would definitely increase. So that's one thing to incorporate when you're submitting.
Alicia, I think Anne has a question.
Okay. Anne?
Thank you. Just back on the units of service, you know, we may have a person that has only 3 units of service, but then the next person might have 20 units of service. You know, it's hard to gauge at times. It's really a guesstimate on what an average units of service might be for a person, but I'm assuming that's kind of what you're looking for, is historically what an average would be for a person.
Yes.
Since they're all different.
So if you take this is one way that I explain it to applicants too, is if you have the number of people that you served last year and the overall units of service, just divide those and get an average, and then you can provide that number. And we would just go off of that number. If there are any differences, you can explain in the Exhibit A, or if you're to be funded, we would explain that in the statement of accomplishments too. So it's just kind of an estimate to give us an idea of about how many units will be served.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And quickly, I'm glad Anne brought that up. Yeah, so all of this, we understand that every client you serve might be slightly different. You might spend a little more money on one client, a little less money on another. They might require a lot more units of service than another client, and that's okay. We just ask you to give us kind of the best average estimate that you have, because this is what we use to carry it through. So this is what we present to the committee. This is what we present to city council. This is what we end up presenting to HUD. And then HUD holds us accountable by then when the end of the year comes, they say, okay, did you meet these goals? So I always suggest too, let's try to you don't have to uh you don't have to put a bunch of the number doesn't have to be high, it just has to be realistic. So if realistic is 3 people, it's 3 people, because at the end we're going to hold you accountable to whatever number you put on that application, and that's what we're going to expect you to do. So just as long as it's realistic and you know how you came up with that number, that's all that matters. And so we usually just say just the average, because we do understand that things might change.
And there's no trouble for actually going over the number of units of service, is it?
Not at all. So try not to overpromise and underdeliver, just underpromise and overdeliver.
Perfect.
That's my
Thank you.
motto.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I couldn't see if I was muted or not. This is just the explanation of the budget tab, and the next slide is what the budget tab will look like. So column A, overall budget for fiscal year 24-25, and the overall budget for 25-26. So you'll list those there. And as I mentioned, it's Santa Maria program only, not the countywide or entire agency budget, because then that will throw off the proposed number of people that you will serve with CDBG. The expenses budget section of the budget tab. So same fiscal year 24-25 overall budget and 25-26. And then third column, column C will be the CDBG portion budget of the proposed Santa Maria program. So here you'll provide a breakdown of the CDBG requested line items. There is a limit of 3 for public services. So you'll fill in what line items you will designate. So if you want to do 10,000 for salaries and the other 10,000 for occupancy and utilities, you'll list there. And then in the program budget narrative, you will explain what that line item will consist of. So occupancy, you can put rent for your facility in Santa Maria. You could put which utilities you're looking to request for. If you're billing for salaries or requesting for salaries, you can put this is for the lead case manager, or who will you be serving. So just make sure to provide enough information just to make sure that we know that it's CDBG eligible. If you have any questions whether it would be eligible or not, you can always email us and we could provide that clarification. Yeah, there's a question. When delivering meals, our volunteers also perform an informal health and welfare check. Is this considered 1 unit of service or 2? I think it would be up to the agency on how it's defined. So if you define it as 2 units of service, just make sure to continue that on if you're to be funded. Just make sure the reporting is consistent with whatever you select. So technical assistance, Zoom Grants technical support staff can assist with any technical questions or general inquiries about the system. So you can email questions@zoomgrants.com, or you can call the number listed on the screen. They're pretty responsive. But if you have any difficulties, you can reach out to us, but they're generally really responsive. And applicants are encouraged to attend office hours for city staff for all CDBG or content related questions. And so our email address is listed here, and I will go into our office hours. So office hours will take place every Thursday following this pre-application workshop. It'll be 10 to 11 every Thursday up until the deadline. So dedicated drop-in office hours will be discussing any questions, comments, or concerns regarding the fiscal year 25-26 funding application process. And questions regarding the application can be emailed to us via email to our work group, which is communityprograms@cityofsantamaria.org, and will only be addressed during the office hours. So in this way, we're able to create a frequently asked questions instead of having to answer the same question multiple times. So we'll provide a frequently asked questions. We'll be recording our office hour sessions. And it's important to note that we won't be available after Thursday, November 21st to answer any application questions. The city's closed to the public on Fridays, and the deadline for the application will be on the 24th. So just make sure to plan accordingly and get your questions answered by our last office hour. And calendar invites will be sent out to all applicants that attend the pre-application workshop. So if you have someone that's working on the application and didn't have a chance to attend, first this session will be recorded and posted, so you can share that. And you can also forward the calendar invites or let us know who to add. So those will be provided. And then I will pass it over to Daisy Ruiz, and she will go over application review and what to expect if the grant is awarded to your agency.
So if an application is determined to be incomplete, it will be reviewed by our Block Grants Advisory Committee, and they will determine the acceptance or rejection of the application. Next slide, please. So what can you expect if you're awarded the grant? So it's super important that you understand the post-award requirements because they are set in place to effectively manage and administer the grant. And one thing of that would be the request for payment. Funds can only be used on a reimbursement basis. Payments are not made until after the approved cost has been incurred and paid by the subrecipient. Proof of payment must be submitted. We have the client intake forms, and these will include the general demographics information required by HUD reporting. And then there's also the quarterly reporting for public services. Quarterly demographic reports are required, each showing the unduplicated counts for the quarter. And we also have our annual or final report, and this will be a summary of your agency's accomplishments. And we also have site monitoring, and in this we will review records through an annual monitoring. And for record keeping, the subrecipient must maintain up-to-date files for original source documentation for all CDBG-related expenses and procedures. And it's important to review this training or the orientation video linked on this slide or on the CDBG's, the city's CDBG web page for additional information. And we will be sending this PowerPoint at the end of the meeting. So you'll be able to come back to these slides and review them as necessary. And the information is linked on the PowerPoint. So you'll be able to click on the hyperlink and it'll take you directly to these web pages. Next slide, please. So yeah, for this, it's super important to keep up with documentation. The documentation must speak for itself. If we ever get monitored by HUD, the file folder should speak for themselves. Like we're not able to intervene and be like, oh, this is what happened or this is what's missing. So the more documentation, the better. And it cuts off a lot of like back and forth. So please provide as much documentation as you can with everything you submit. So it will save everyone time, and it's important to have all the documentation for every expense, every line item. So yeah, just submit as much documentation as you can. Next slide, please. And like we mentioned, we will be hosting office hours every Thursday starting next Thursday. And these will be from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. via Teams. And you'll be receiving the calendar invite for that following this meeting. And then our deadline, also super important. It will be on Sunday, November 24th at 11:59. And the applications will be submitted via Zoom Grants. And yeah, they'll be submitted via Zoom Grants, and the application will close right on the dot. Next, we have the site visits. They will be conducted during the week of January 21st to January 30th. And in this, the Block Grants Advisory Committee will be visiting the agencies, and in that point, you'll be able to talk more about like your agency and what y'all propose to do with the funding. Each applicant will have approximately 45 minutes for the site visit. Team typically made up of 3 committee members. And then during this site visit, those familiar with the contents of the grant application and the administering of the proposed CDBG program. After the site visits, the Block Grants Advisory Committee will conduct the deliberation process, which consists of 2 in-person meetings. And during the first deliberation session, agencies will have the opportunity to speak before the Block Grants Advisory Committee. Each applicant is granted 3 minutes to speak before the committee about each proposed program or project, unless otherwise determined by the chair. During the second deliberations, agencies will not have the opportunity to speak, but they're welcome to observe the deliberations process. And during this meeting, the committee will rank agency applications and make a recommendation for funding. You could review this information and more on the NOFA packet found in our webpage. And there you'll be able to find information on all the dates and information we discussed. And like I mentioned earlier, we will be sending this PowerPoint as well, so you'll have access to these slides. But the NOFA is like your go-to for anything. It'll have all our information, all our important dates, information. So if you ever feel lost at any point of this process, review the NOFA, and then if your answer is not in the NOFA, then reach out to us. But most of the time, there's a lot of helpful information in the NOFA, so you'll get a lot of questions answered from there. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and don't forget the deadline, November 24th, super important. Mark it in your calendar, save the date. And yeah, next slide, please. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach us via email or our number listed. And yeah, pretty much it. I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Daisy. Any questions? We did have some questions in the chat. We have answered those questions. If you have any further questions, of course, please feel free to reach out to us. Also, I included in the chat flyer in English and in Spanish for a needs workshop we are hosting on October 23rd. That is a Wednesday from 5:30 to 7 at Shepherd Hall inside the Santa Maria Public Library, and it is for our consolidated plan. So every 5 years, HUD requires us to put together a big report to give them give them an idea of what we are hoping to do in the next 5 years with CDBG dollars. So this needs workshop kicks off our con plan outreach and research so that we can submit everything by May of next year. So we will be hosting that. You might get invites to other needs workshops with the cities of Lompoc and Goleta, and also with the county of Santa Barbara. And we are all on the same 5-year cycle. So we're all kind of doing this as a team. So we scattered our meetings so that none of our meetings would conflict with another city's meeting. So if you get invited to those other meetings, if you can, I know it's a lot to ask, but if you can, please attend. It's always super important to be able to hear from those that are actually working with the public every day to find out what the needs are. Because again, this is one of the many tools we use to determine how we're going to use the funding in the next few years. So I saw a question, Paul.
Hi, Rosie. Hi, Alicia. Hi, Desi. Hi, and I apologize if this was already covered. Can you tell us about how the process in the commission regards returning applicants? For example, if you're funded currently this year for a program and you feel that's your highest need and you want to reapply for next year, how is that considered or prioritized?
It's considered it's taken into consideration based on, well, the needs, and then also how much funding we have, and then the administrative capacity of that agency, basically using the local criteria that we have. We don't, I know other agencies provide priority to those that are reapplying. We don't do that just because we always want to give new applicants a fair shot, but it, but then there is also something said to having a program that is established. So again, that was part of the criteria that we tend to fund activities who have whose programs are already established in the community. They're not brand new projects, first year pilot program kind of thing. So I hope that answers your question, Paul.
Rosie, sorry, just to clarify, I meant like specifically a program, and I apologize if this was something I'm not remembering correctly, but I felt like there might have been in the past maybe a priority of if you were like reapplying for the same program, so not necessarily an established agency or program, but if you're just reapplying for funding for the same program versus a new program that wasn't funded the previous cycle.
It would be treated like all the other applications. You would still go through the same funding process and the same criteria would apply. It would still be it would still be included in all of the um it, it would be treated the same as all the other applicants. Does that make
And
sense?
Awesome.
I
Yep.
just wanted to add to, for our block grants advisory committee, we provide a staff analysis, which covers how the agent or how the applicant has done in the past with CDBG funded activities. So we kind of give our input if the agency left money on the table or if any reports were submitted late. So we make sure that the committee knows that. So if you're a current applicant, when we do our desk review when we do our desk reviews and our on-site monitorings, we make sure to let the committee know following all of our site visits and all of our reviews. And then I see our committee member Mackenzie, you have your hand up. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I am an advisory member, so I sit and we review the applications together, and I just wanted to be here to let everyone know kind of what my perspective is as a member. So we're appointed by city council members and we're representing the interests of residents in the area. So understanding that we have an idea of who has had this funding before, and as Alicia and Rosie has said, we do get these updates about, are you submitting your paperwork on time? Are you invoicing like in proportion to what you said you would do in the year? And it's a 1-year award, right? So we expect applicants to reapply from year to year. And these projects, the funding is meant to supplement, not replace what your internal funding is like. So I did want to just point out those, and we bring it up if we've seen some issues with your performance in the last year. We'll ask you those questions at the site visit because we want to make sure that our money is being spent responsibly or allocated responsibly. If there's areas of improvement, we just want to make sure that we're communicating that clearly as well, because if an agency isn't spending money, and I think about this all the time, it could have gone to someone else who was using those funds, and making sure that is a service that's being provided in the community within that 1 year time frame. If you have any questions about that, or you'd like to learn more, our meetings are public and we do review this information pretty regularly every month. Any questions about how we review it? And there's a board of, what are we, about 10, Rosie? Is that how many we have?
I believe we currently have 12.
So
Yeah.
there's quite a few of us. So my perspective is going to be one in a group, right? And so we all have our own perspectives and we're trying to look at it from different lenses. There is a question, I believe, have you received funds from us in the past? Just for us to know, like, oh, when did we fund them? Was it last year? Did we talk about them? Oh, we did or we didn't. Those are the couple of things that I would say. It just indicates to us we don't put you higher on the scale, or it's everyone is applying for this money in an equal spot, but past performance does come into consideration in the sense that, oh, this hasn't been going well in the last application, so maybe we need to talk and support them a little bit more. And it's also kind of how critical the services are. There are so many things that are needed in our community, and we want to make sure whoever gets the money is, doing the work and it's timely. I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank you, Mackenzie. Thanks for joining us. Any other questions? There was a good question in the chat about a minimum or a maximum for public services. The minimum award will be 15,000 and the maximum is 10% of our public service cap, which if we're getting, let's say, $200,000 for public service, it would be a $20,000 cap. Also, I apologize if you're having trouble opening the flyers. We will send them out via email, but I did include them as a Word document in the chat just in case.
I just wanted to add to Rosie's answer about the minimum and the maximum. So in Zoom grants, we have it as 21,000. So just to be fair, that'll be the cap. And then once we get our final allocation, we'll adjust any allocations based on that, based on the percentage of that. So for the application, the max you could request is 21,000 and the minimum's 15. But I just
Thank
wanted to
you.
add that.
Fingers crossed we get more money next year. And if we get more money next year, that means more money for all of you. So, any other questions before we end this meeting? All right. Well, if anything comes up, you know how to reach us. Thank you again. Thank you for everything you do. Appreciate your time. And we'll be chatting soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
And then turn the mic off.